What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Wrestling Hour right here early on ad-free shows. And, of course, in a few days, you can get us for free over there on the MyFandom app because we are presented by MyFandom. And, of course, Dave Sturchio alongside my trusty sidekick, Josh Shernoff. Josh, how are we doing today, pal?
Oh, man, we're doing great. And you said MyFandom app, but it's the MyFandom app YouTube channel where you can watch this. MyFandom app is where you can take that's where you can take all of your photos and all of your videos from live events you've attended and log them on your own profile and on the specific event profile itself. MyFandomApp.com. Maybe even Android is available by the time this airs. I don't know.
Now we're getting crazy. But look, stay tuned. Listen, man, this is a very, very special episode of the Wrestling Hour. In fact, it's the Wrestling Hour Plus.
It's an extended one.
We have an extended one because we have a guest today that can talk professional wrestling, the good, the bad, the indifferent, for hours and hours and hours on end. And you know what? He does just that with multiple podcasts. Today, Josh, we have the pleasure of sitting down and the privilege and the honor of sitting down with Mr. 83 Weeks himself, Eric Bischoff. I'm jazzed about the entire thing.
Man, I could not be more excited. I've had the opportunity to know Eric for a number of years now through ad-free shows, StarCast events, and he was on So Says Shernoff, my old show, before. And man, he is just a wealth of knowledge. And part of what we talk about in this conversation is, we're gonna talk about a lot of things, and some of it is who's in touch, who's out of touch. He's not out of touch. By any stretch of the imagination. No, he's well versed, and whether he would want to or not, I think he could jump right back in at any time and run a company. And I think he's getting sick to his stomach just hearing that right now. But but just, man, could not be more thrilled that he was willing to give us the time to be on the Wrestling Hour. Again, it's early and ad-free. We're all part of the same family here at adfreeshows.com. So hopefully you're listening and watching this right now on adfreeshows.com. But if you're not, and you're checking this out just 2 days later, we love you just the same.
Just the same.
It's the old Bischoff, the Bischoff, the point and the...
Yeah, no, a lot of those. Hey, listen. We're not going to waste any more time babbling about it. Let's get to the interview. It is a fantastic, very long. Listen, if you're a wrestling enthusiast, buckle up. It gets very, very good, very, very juicy. And of course, without further ado, Mr. Eric Bischoff.
Eric, thank you so much for being here.
And the crowd goes wild. You people.
That's right.
There's the point. There it is.
You people. I really do.
Oh man, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Things are beautiful weather here in Cody, Wyoming. I'm right outside of Yellowstone National Park. I mean, I could be like Wyoming's version of Sarah Palin and tell you it would be true that I can see Yellowstone National Park from my deck. So It's a beautiful full day, though. Probably going to be one of the last before winter sets in, but it's absolutely gorgeous.
I'm out here in Pennsylvania, and it's summer pretty much at this point, which is kind of ridiculous.
Doesn't want to make the weather over here in Jersey doesn't want to make up its mind. And one day it'll be like 55. You're like, oh, cool, the fall's about to start. This is going to feel good. It's football weather. I feel good. And then the next day it'll be 80, and you're like, wait, hold on, like what's going on?
This time of year, your head is thinking football. You're thinking, a little chill in the air, cooking hot dogs on a grill. It's a vibe. It's a feeling you only get once a year, and then Mother Nature's just fucking with you.
Exactly that.
Nobody wants to go on the beach when the leaves are turning.
No. Right. My daughter's the same way. She's like, Daddy, the leaves are turning colors, but they're not falling off the trees. And I was like, well, you know what? Ask your science teacher.
Yeah, they don't. None of the trees know what to do. They start blooming again. It's ridiculous. My daughter's trying to pick out clothes this morning, and all she has is like summer looking clothes. Like, and she's like, this seems weird to, But yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Weather Hour. Where our guest Eric Bischoff.
Version of the Weather Channel.
Yeah, right. So thank you for taking the time to do this. Obviously, no stranger to podcasts, as this, if you're watching this early and ad-free on ad-free shows, we are super excited that we are now a part of the ad-free shows family, which you are a cornerstone. They're going wild again. You are a cornerstone, of course, with 83 weeks, but that's not all you have. So you want to kind of kick things off, tell everybody the 40 other podcasts that you're doing.
Well, I do, this is the only podcast that I do, but I do a YouTube show called Wise Choices. It was just born out of a stupid Tom and Tony Conway, and I decided to do it just for fun. And it turned into be kind of a big deal. It's like my YouTube channel went poof. I've had it for 5 years. It was kind of doing okay. It was. And then this cat by the name of Anthony Evans is his real name, but he goes by. Yep. He came in. He's like a YouTube savant and really understands how to maximize content for YouTube because he understands the algorithms. He understands how YouTube likes content. And he got a hold of me and through Conrad Thompson, of course, my Sherpa guidesman in the world of podcasting. And we started doing some stuff together, and my YouTube channel just blew up and is now kind of an important piece of what I do. So having a blast with that. Got a lot of other projects outside of podcasting, as much as I've tried to stay out of the television business for the last 10 years. It keeps calling me back, and I've got a couple of really fun projects that I'm working on with other people, and those are fun. So I keep myself busy, just doing the same stuff I've always been doing, just in different ways.
So yeah, with television, that kind of leads into, I think, one of the first questions we had, which I'm sure, it's tough with somebody like you. We're watching, of course, the Mr. McMahon documentary. There you are on that, which I know you and Conrad kind of did a wrap up of each episode, which, everybody can find in the archives, as Conrad would say. But one of the things you had mentioned was that you weren't actually even interviewed for that specifically. That you're just constantly, every so often, WWE or whoever will come out and they'll ask you questions and they'll gather information on different topics. And then they have that in the bank that they can use for various projects. But so to have you on here and have a conversation where we're asking you questions is kind of difficult because I feel like you've been asked every question. Look, as a fan, we can sit here and say, tell us about, we want to hear from you about the NWO. Well, look, the reality is, how many times have you talked about the NWO, right? So one thing we wanted to ask you was, you mentioned television, and we both have so much respect for what you've done, not just what you did in WCW, but what you've done in developing television shows and the process that goes into that. So I feel like when we ask you a question, like Dave has a great question he's going to ask you, you're not just coming at this from the wrestling fan standpoint or even someone who's a wrestling booker, for lack of a better term. This is somebody who's also looking at understanding ratings, understanding how that works, what the network's looking for, et cetera. So Dave, if you want to go ahead with the question you had.
Yeah, for sure. It was one of the ones that, like, if you have Eric Bischoff for a couple minutes, what are you going to ask him first? And obviously I follow you on X, Twitter, across all social media platforms. And I know that there's things you love and there's things that you could disagree with. And you've made quite the noise as far as things you disagree with. And that's fine, because I think that's kind of the things that I resonate with. Right. So the big question is, for me at least, you wake up tomorrow and you get a call from your really, really dear good friend, Tony Khan, and he backs up the truck to your driveway and says, here is every dollar that you ever wanted to do this. And he's going to stay out of your way. AEW's obviously struggled in the ratings, struggled with attendance, struggled with multiple facets of them, but it's your first day on the job. What are you going to do to at least fix it? Or are we at the point of no return? Like, is there no way to fix all of this? And when I say fix, I mean, like, look, there's AEW diehards that just love every single thing they do, so it doesn't matter. They can't do wrong. But I'm saying, like, if you had a shot to say, you know what, it starts with this, what is that?
It's a great question. It's a hypothetical one, and I tend to avoid those. But we're gonna dig in. But let me first say, just so this stays in context, at this stage of my life, realistically, Tony Khan doesn't have enough money. I mean, he has enough money. He has more than enough money. But realistically, there's not a reasonable amount of money that one could expect for someone like me. And I may put a high price tag on myself or not, depending on how much fun a project is. But there's no amount of money that would interest me. Now, that's not because I don't love the wrestling business. It's not because I don't think I could do it. It's for no other reason than, quite frankly, in order to jump in and do the things that would need to be done, my life would have to be drastically altered. And I'm not up for it. I started this off by talking about how beautiful it is where I live, and it means more to me outside of my family than anything. I love where I live. I love my lifestyle. I don't have a shit ton of money. I mean, I'm working for a living just like everybody else. I still got bills coming in. They don't quit sending that shit the minute you turn 65. Oh, you're retired. We're not going to send the bills anymore. No, not me. They keep coming, so I keep working. I want to make that clear. So it's not like I have so much money or I don't need it. That's not it. But when I took the job in 2019 to go to WWE, that was an emotional decision. Meaning, when Bruce Pritchard called me and said, "Hey, Vince would like to talk to you about possibly coming in. Would you be interested?" First of all, Bruce is one of my best friends in life. I love Bruce. We've developed a very, very good and close relationship. And the idea of working with Bruce, because we're not only good friends, but I really respect his thought process and his take on things. Not that I agree with him all the time, but we're that kind of perfect balance in a way. And the idea of what we could accomplish together, not to say anything of Paul Heyman was there, and Paul and I have always wanted to work together and collaborate in one way, shape, or form. So I got so excited emotionally about the opportunity, and the money didn't suck either. So I made the decision for two reasons. One driven strictly by my emotions, the other driven by money. I'm glad I took the job. I'm grateful for the experience, however brief it was. It was only about 4 months. But I learned that at this point in my life, not just because I'm getting older, it's not even it. I'm in better shape now. I feel better. I have more energy. I'm fucking smarter because I've gone through more. So it's not that I don't want to work. I want to really work and be productive. It's not that. But for me to upend my life to the degree that I would have to move to Jacksonville and to think about wrestling 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, living in an environment I don't really want to live in because I wouldn't have the things I do love. I couldn't allow myself to do that because I know I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't be satisfied as a person. And I've also learned through that experience that if I'm out of my element, if I'm living somewhere I absolutely don't want to be, whatever talents I have creatively or any other way is really mitigated. I mean, it's just not the same for me. And I couldn't get myself into the right frame of mind to do what I would have to do at this point in my life. Living now, if Tony Khan wanted to move his office to Cody, Wyoming, fuck yeah, I'm in all day long.
So it's just about logistics, really. It's logistics.
So I want to make that clear so that my answer is maybe easier for people. Not easier, but maybe they'll understand it from a different perspective.
Sure.
Okay. Now to really answer your question. I told you I babble, right? I told you, I warned you.
Good. No, this is what we want.
That's the smartest thing you could do because other people will clip up stuff and they'll be like, "Oh, this is what he said. Did you hear that?" And they don't hear the context prior to, so they would make all the rational.
I just want the people that are listening to the whole show to really have a chance to understand.
Somebody once said, "Context is king." Was a quote.
Yeah, really. Right.
So A wise man once said that. Yes. So okay. So your answer here.
What would I do? I'm going to answer the last part of the question first. Have they gone too far? In other words, has the brand been damaged to the point that it's irreparable? I think the answer to that is no, but they're getting really close. A really successful television executive who is still a great friend of mine, his name is Gary Considine. He was the executive producer at NBC. He was the executive producer of the Jay Leno Show. Super guy, very, very smart, still very active in the industry today as a producer. Told me once that in his experience, we were just talking about programming in general and the audience and ratings and shifts and all the things that impact those things. This was back in the late 90s we were talking about this. This was before streaming and social media and YouTube and all that shit. But his take was, and I think about this all the time to this day, that once you lose your audience, in other words, once someone who is typically a member of your audience and watches your show on a regular basis, once that person consciously or subconsciously makes the decision that it's no longer worth their time to watch your show. And that usually amounts to, am I satisfied? Am I enjoying this? Am I having a good time? Am I forgetting about my shitty day at work because I'm lost in this fun stuff I'm watching? Whatever that is. That's usually why people watch television, right? But once a member of the audience or your audience in general subconsciously or consciously says, nah, I'm not getting enough out of this, and they move on to something else, it's 5 times harder to get them to come back than it was to get them to show up in the first place. One of the advantages that Tony Khan had when he launched was because the market, the wrestling fan, the wrestling audience, television audience, and live, was really looking for an alternative. WWE had gotten stale. I said that many times before I even went to work there in 2019, when people would ask me what I thought about the WWE product. It had gotten very stale. It was successful financially, but for the consumer, it was same old, right? Tony had the advantage of breaking into the market at a time when the audience there was a big appetite for an alternative because they just weren't satisfied with what they were getting at WWE. That gave Tony an amazing marketing opportunity, and he took advantage of it. And his premiere show opened up with about 1.5 million viewers. Everybody that was watching that show, including me, by the way, and I don't know if you've heard me tell the story, but I watched the debut episode in the writer's room in Stamford, Connecticut, with a room full of writers who were on my team for SmackDown. We were working late, the show came on, we put it up, and all of us were cheering AEW on. Not like, yeah, they finally did it, hopefully they'll kick our ass, not that. But it was a very enthusiastic reaction to just about everything that they saw because everybody wanted it to succeed, including me. Because I firmly believe that good competition, real competition, not cosplay competition like Tony Khan lives in, but real competition increases the visibility of the product. There's a bigger buzz. It becomes a bigger part of pop culture. There's a lot of great reasons why you would want your competition to be successful. And I was a cheerleader. Early on, I was posting nothing but positive things. When they announced they were going to Arthur Ashe for the first time, I put it over huge. I was so excited about them. But over a period of time, probably a year and a half or so, I started seeing patterns that I recognized very, very well because I've been through this shit in one way, shape, or form for over 35 years. From being basically a maintenance worker, part-time editor, part-time announcer, part-time at AWA, to running a $350 million publicly held company for Turner Broadcasting. So I've seen everything in between. And I started seeing patterns in terms of creative direction and decisions that I had to start throwing flags out, just to myself, going, oh, that's not smart. That's going to cost them down the road. And I kept seeing it more and more and more. And then Tony came out one day, a couple of years ago, he said something really disrespectful and stupid, in my opinion. And at that point, I went, fuck it. I'm not going to just sit here and talk to myself. I'm going to talk about what I see. and what I think from my experience is going wrong and how it's going to end up. Going back to Gary Considine, I was one of those people that consciously or subconsciously said, fuck it, I'm done with this. I'm not cheering it on anymore. And it's going to be a lot harder to get me interested in AEW as a fan again, because I've already made a conscious decision not to watch it. And I've told myself, I don't like it. That same thing is true with the nearly 900,000 viewers that tuned in for the premiere episode in October of 2019, who have since gone on to other things because they made the same decision I did at some point, which is, it's not what they said it was going to be. I can go into that in detail if you ever want to do another show, because we could do a whole show of branding statements and mission statements.
Don't threaten us with a good time.
But now, to answer the question in my long-winded way, could you get those disenfranchised or whatever? Could you get those fans back to AEW? Yes, but it will be 5 times harder, because Tony's no longer the new kid in the block. Now he's got baggage. The AEW brand has a tremendous amount of baggage. The product itself needs a ton of fucking work, and the talent has ended up getting dinged in terms of the perception of them in the marketplace, because they're associated with a product that's just getting dragged through the mud because of Tony Khan. So what would I do? First of all, Dave, you said, Tony Khan said he wouldn't interfere. And I chuckled when you said that, because there ain't no fucking way that's ever going to happen. Right? And I don't mind living in a hypothetical world.
I was just going to say, all hypothetical.
30 seconds or so along the way, otherwise I lose my shit. That'll never happen. But let's pretend that it could. At that point, it would take me a month and a half or 2 months to do in my mind, an internal audit. Talent, operations. When I say talent, attitudes, length of contract, how much time do they have left in the contract? Are they coming up, in another couple of months? If they are, I may not want to put a lot of time into thinking about that person unless we're pretty sure we can re-sign them. But I wouldn't even want that squared up before I started thinking about somebody too much. Because otherwise you're spending a lot of time thinking about a storyline that involves multiple people, and the key part of the story may not be around in 60 days or 90 days.
Right.
So I would do an internal audit, get to know the talent, not only professionally, but on a personal basis, because that's where you really see where potential is. I, at least, when I see talent in the ring, I kind of judge them technically. When I say judge, I mean, I'm aware of their technical abilities and how crisp they look, and, what their timing is like, and how well they sell or don't sell. I'm aware of those things, but you don't learn about potential as much, because those things don't reflect potential character. So I really want to get to know the people, to see what parts of their personality you can build upon, as opposed to trying to teach someone how to be an actor or an actress. So I spent a couple months doing that. All the while assembling a team of people that I trusted. When I say trusted, I mean creatively, professionally. Not that they have to agree with me at all. In fact, I worked pretty hard to put diverse opinions around me, because, you got to check yourself, man. Nobody's the single smartest microfather in the world. You got to surround yourself with smart people who could fill in some of the weaknesses that I have. I'm really good at certain things creatively, not so good at others. So be smart for me to find people who complement my strengths, even if they don't necessarily always agree with my approach. I would build that team. That team immediately on day one, that might be the first thing I do, by the way, is assemble the right team. That team day one, while I'm trying to get an audit here and get to know the talent, try to mine the field, so to speak, for character, personality, charisma, in addition to in-ring skills. While I'm doing that, this team would be charged with one thing and one thing only, and that would be to develop a formula that could be replicated while the formula stays the same. But there is a way to develop stories, just like there is a way to develop characters. And storyline development can be very, very fluid, as long as it is based in some kind of a structure that's designed to get you from point A to point B to point C, and then finally to the finish line. What I see in AEW product is a lot of, we're going to open up with C, and the next week we do A, and we're going to skip a week, and then we're going to do B, and then we're going to go back to C. There's no flow. There's no build, not to the extent that is necessary. Now, if you listen to the hardcore Kool-Aid drinking, lost their fucking mind social media AEW fans, they see storylines. They'll be driving down the street, see a stop sign, and think it's a storyline. I mean, it's what they think is the storyline is the reason they have the problem they have, because Tony evidently agrees. There is a formula. It's not brain surgery. The art, though, and the reason it hasn't been done yet, to the extent that it should, and I don't know what's going on currently. I don't know what the process is currently in WWE, so maybe something like this exists there. It didn't in 2019 when I was there. That was one of the things I wanted to try to accomplish, by the way. Never got time to do it. But I'd have that formula in place so that once we kind of figure out who we want to play with, to rebuild the brand, because that's what you're doing. You're rebuilding a damaged brand, just like I did with WCW. Prior to Hulk Hogan in 1994, and even afterwards, prior to Nitro, WCW was, then there's WCW. Kind of like, now there's AEW. We were insignificant in the big picture. We were number 2. But we might as well have been number 222 because of all the damage that had been done to the brand. So now when I got it, I wasn't in the same position Tony Khan was when he started, when the audience is going, yay, Tony Khan, an alternative, come on, bring it, yay, we're going to support you. I was the opposite. WCW had such a bad reputation and nobody knew who the hell I was, really. Once it came out that I was taking over WCW, it was like, oh my God, go away. Stop. You put a fork in it. We had so much negative baggage, just like Tony Khan has right now. That makes Gary Considine's formula of how difficult it is to get an audience to come back to the product even more difficult. So what Tony has to do is really convince, first and foremost, that this brand is an entirely different brand. This is AEW 5.0. We're going to skip 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
This is a fucking deal. And maybe explain how and why it's going to be different. But here's the marked difference between doing what I just suggested and the mistake that Tony made in the very fucking beginning. You don't come out and tell your audience who's waiting with open arms and with their wallets in their mouth. You don't say to them, this is what I'm going to be. This is how we're going to be different than WWE, which Tony did. We're going to be more sports-based. We're going to wins and losses will matter. It's not that silly shit going on in AEW or WWE. We're going to be different. Great. He sold me. He sold everybody in that room in WWE headquarters that watched the premiere episode with me. We all bought the promise. 6 months later, what the fuck? They're not doing what they said they were going to do. Now, it was early, so the general audience went, yeah, okay, he's new. We're still rooting for you, Tony. That's called goodwill. When people overlook flaws that are obvious, but they want you to win so badly that they just don't see it. It's kind of like when your dog's, misbehaving. I'm sorry, my dog's in the room with me. She'll take this personally. When your dog's misbehaving, because you love your dog, your dog's misbehaving, but it's okay. It's my dog. Come on. That's what happens to the audience initially. But once that goodwill wears off, now you're under a freaking microscope. That's why a mission statement, a branding statement, a promise, when you declare to your audience that you want to be a part of your audience, when you declare to them that you are going to be this thing and they get excited about it, you got to deliver. You can't make a big promise and a differentiation between your brand and somebody else's brand. Make this big promise that is easily identified and monitored and people are watching, and then within a matter of weeks or months, just like it never happened. So in this AEW 5.0 version, we have a formula. We would be able to talk about story in a much more sophisticated way. We'd be able to show examples. The audience would understand that we're going to be telling our stories in a much more compelling way, because that's what they want. 4-star, 5-star bullshit, the cage match rankings, all that silly fucking internet wrestling horse shit that only about 3% of the audience that watches wrestling nationwide, worldwide, actually gives a flying fuck about. None of that matters. People watch to escape. They watch to identify vicariously through the characters that they're watching, whether it's a drama series, a sitcom, or an action movie. They want to identify and live vicariously through those characters. They can't do that if you don't draw them in with story and expose them to risk and expose them to challenges in the story and inner turmoil and defeat and all the things that go into the human emotion and experience. You've got to bring those to life in your storylines. That's what I would do, and I would focus on that. There's certainly not an issue with the talent. They got more roster than they need, quite frankly. Right. Tony has the finances to be able to put the right team together, but that would take such a big emotional commitment. Emotional because Tony's too tied to it. It's his baby. It's his identity. This truly is a vanity project. Tony launched AEW because he wanted to get a job at WWE as a booker, and Triple H stood him up. That's what started the whole thing. Tony's always wanted to be a Paul. He grew up watching and being a huge fan of ECW. Tony personally wants to be recognized like Paul Heyman was with ECW, or Vince McMahon at the time, or even Eric Bischoff through the mid and late 90s. Tony wants to be held in that same category of producer, promoter. That's what means more to him than anything, which is why he'll never give up control. Because Tony would have to admit, I suck at booking, but I'm really good at other stuff. But I don't care about the other stuff. I only care about booking. That's why it's never going to happen.
Now, something that, you were talking about, the five times harder to bring people back, right? One thing that pro wrestling has that other television shows don't is the ability, that crossover from one company to another. You can't, if you're watching Chicago Fire, right? And you're like, hey, it's not quite as good as it used to be, whatever. They can't just go and say, hey, you know what? Why don't we bring in, Walter White from Breaking Bad? That'll do it. That'll bring it, right? They could bring Bryan Cranston, but they couldn't bring the character exactly. In pro wrestling, we've seen this time and time again with AEW, and we saw this in WCW. We've seen this in WWE. You can go elsewhere and you can bring an established talent in that theoretically can, much quicker than maybe another television show, in my opinion, and tell me if you disagree, much quicker than another show could maybe earn that audience back, at least for one night. You theoretically could grab those 900,000 people if you got the right person to come back. The problem that I see with it is, and Sasha Banks, Mercedes Moné is a perfect example. You can bring somebody in, but to your point about the story, that's what people want. So that might work. People have talked about, is Shane McMahon going to come in? Will he come in some way? And whether he will or not, the point is, if Shane McMahon came in, that's one theoretical great day that they could have. That's one massive episode of television that they could have. But what about the next week? Right? So that's where the story comes in. But do you think that there is a case to that maybe pro wrestling has the potential to make it slightly easier than that 5 times that another television show would have to do?
Very incrementally. I mean, let's be honest. We've seen talent go back and forth from company to company, and it very rarely, if ever, moves the needle for anything more than a week or two. And then if it's successful, it builds over time. If the story, to your point, if the story's there, if the character development is there, if it's compelling to the average audience, not the, Tony called his own audience sickos. I was social media, somebody says, I'm an AEW fan. I was at the event. He called us sickos, and me and my friends were looking at each other like, what the fuck did he just call us? That's an example of bad branding. It was probably a spontaneous thing that he thought was funny, but holy shit. Making fun of your audience is not a great way to build your audience.
Last I checked, that's not good.
You just call them dumb fucks. I mean, come on.
I feel like I don't know what it was. I feel like he was referencing. I feel like it's a reference that's over my head, and maybe he's referencing something. But yeah, I mean, and that's the biggest problem with it too. Is no matter what he calls them, he's playing to both an audience of himself, right? It's at the end of the day, it's him. He's playing with his action figures, and it's what does he want to see? And hey, you know what? God bless him. He's got the money to do so, right? But on the other side of it, there's all of these fans where you're playing to this small audience, and they might love it, and they might be diehard.
You're alienating the other 99.7% of the audience that is something to watch,
and it's not going to grow. And so the question is that going to keep it from ever being able to reach the potential that it should for this talent?
Unless Tony has a religious type experience, an epiphany, if you will, and says, I want this company to be successful. I want my legacy in professional wrestling to be the guy that launched AEW and turned it into a hugely successful franchise for a long time. And in order to do that, I have to realize that I'm really not that good at booking and my vision isn't right. So I'm going to bring in somebody to help me with the vision, the branding, and the execution and the creative. And hand it over. Handle the administration. Be the face of the company. Be out there meeting with sponsors. Be out there with your press releases. Be out there. Be visible. Just don't try to produce the show. But until Tony has that epiphany, because he has no other pressure, right? It's not like he has a boss. He doesn't give two shits about the money. Right. So if it's not money and performance, it's a hobby. Like some people spend a lot of money to play golf. I have a friend that writes a check for $750,000 a year just to be a member of a club. Man. And then it costs another fortune to actually go out and play.
Don't start talking to me about clubs too.
God forbid you decide to have 3 beers and a pizza when you're done. I mean, so it's cool that I guess, I don't know, it would be unfulfilling for me personally, but I can understand, guys got the money, hell, go have some fun. And if that's that's the real motivation, and I think it is, then there's nothing that's ever going to change. But if Tony were to all of a sudden get a phone call from Dad or somebody and say, hey, this is not working, or the network, whatever deal they have, and I've got a lot of suspicions about that deal, and I'm digging in and getting some pretty interesting information that I'll share once I confirm it. I don't want to do a Dave Meltzer and come out and blow a bunch of shit out there that I found out after the fact isn't right. So
you don't want to be accurate? What do you talk? Stop it. Stop that nonsense.
I just don't want to be an asshole.
That's there we are.
There it is.
I may sound like an asshole, but I'm not actually one. I look, in real life, what would I do? I explained to you, I think pretty well what I would do, at a high level, quick level. But none of that is going to happen if I'm right. If this is really an emotional project and not a business project, we're just pretending it's business to justify our emotional needs, then nothing is going to change. Unless at some point it becomes a business
So
maybe the network says, look, Tony, we paid you a lot of money, whatever that amount of money really is. It is not what people are talking about. I promise you. That I will promise you. It comes in the form of things, it's called in-kind consideration from a contractual perspective. So in other words, if I give you $500,000 worth of rate card advertising that I can't sell anyway, it's just sitting there, but I'm going to sell it to you, or I'm going to include it in the deal, but it has a value. And it becomes a part of the overall value of the deal. But in real life, it's not cash.
Right.
Now, that's just one example of things that could be happening. But anyway, if at some point TBS says, yeah, whatever our deal really is, it's not working for us unless you get your ratings up, that might be enough pressure. It won't be financial. It'll be the relationship with the network. Does Tony have thresholds in his contract? In other words, yes, Tony, we'll give you $185 million, whatever the number is. We'll give that to you. Part of it is in-kind consideration, by the way. But we're going to give that to you as long as you achieve X and X and X throughout a given year. Well, if he starts falling short, and I mean, really, if you look at the audience, it's not just deteriorating, it's falling off a fucking cliff.
Right.
At the rate of decline that we're seeing now, I am not a math guy, but we're 30% year over year loss. 2 more years of that, and there'll be like 14 people watching. I mean, it's like the reverse of compounding interest.
Right.
It's compounding losses.
Yeah,
and
it's not
when
good.
you're at 600,000 or 700,000 viewers total, and you're losing 30% year after year, somebody with a greater math mind than I could probably go, in 3.3 years, there's going to be nobody watching the show. That's the trajectory they're on.
Dave and I both, and I'm sure you as well, have friends who work there. And, I look at it from that side where I say, I want to see this succeed. I believe the same as you, the competition, good competition, real competition. The rising tide lifts all ships, right? So I think that's a great aspect. But the other side of it is you look at people that we know and the people that we don't know there who are getting a paycheck, who maybe, there's only so much space. This goes out. Where are they going? Right. So this is good for everybody in the business. I remember when I was I remember training at the Wild Simone Training Center when WWF bought WCW. And I remember the next day coming into training as a guy myself who's 5'8", and a lot of other people around that same size. A lot of us didn't have that WWE, WWF goal. A lot of us looked at it and said, hey, there's this great company that handles cruiserweights a lot better than WWF does. And when that was gone, there was like a somber mood. I remember walking into training there. So I always look at that and I think, like, for me, I want to see these people have another place to work. I want to see TNA build and build and build. I want to see MLW become something. I would love to see that because that makes the entire industry stronger. But to your point of everything you're saying, I also agree. Look, he bought Ring of Honor, which really all that did was take away another place for people to work. And I think he could have done, Dave and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the show. There's so much he could have done with Ring of Honor. Not necessarily because Ring of Honor came in as some strong brand, but it could have been built to be their NXT. It could have been built to be something different where now they have these two in-house brands instead of their Forbidden Door with a bunch of people in a company, and not to be disrespectful towards New Japan, but people in the United States primarily don't know anything about those athletes. Maybe we should, but we don't.
I want to talk about New Japan for a little bit because, first of all, I agree with everything you're saying, John, everything. And I understand, how guys who were looking at the cruiserweight division all of a sudden were inspired that maybe someday I could get that shot, and then all of a sudden have that shot go away. That would be shitty. But this kind of goes to what I was talking about earlier in terms of how Tony treats AEW. Look, I had an amazing relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling. When New Japan Pro Wrestling actually mattered.
Right.
It doesn't matter anymore. it doesn't even matter in Japan compared to what it was.
Sure.
It is a small wrestling company in Japan that does okay, but it is not a fraction of what New Japan was when I was working with them, starting in about 1993. And I developed a really good relationship with Antonio Inoki. I traveled the world with Antonio Inoki. Antonio Inoki reached out to me to try to get Muhammad Ali to be a part of the Korean tour. And I set up an additional meeting prior to that. A year prior to that, I set up a meeting. Antonio called me and said, I'm going to be in Denver. I would really like to meet Muhammad Ali, because Antonio hadn't seen Muhammad since their fight back in the 70s. Right. They lost contact, right? And Antonio knew that I had a direct connection to Muhammad. I could reach out to him. So Antonio asked me. I called Muhammad, got him involved, set the meeting up, flew out to Denver so I could be there and bring the two together for the first time since their fight. It was very cool. Sonny Ono was there. It all took place in a hotel room. Nobody else saw it. There was no press there. It was a really cool moment. And I'm glad I got to be a part of it and actually set it up. But from that point forward, I got very close to Antonio Inoki. Masa Saito was one of my closest friends. He's passed away. I was at his he had a memorial service a couple of years ago in Tokyo, about a year after he died. And I was invited by Michi, his wife, to come and speak at his memorial. And I was close to the business operations side, Mr. Bischoff, who managed the business side of New Japan. But New Japan was also putting 40 and 50,000 people in the Tokyo Dome a couple of times a year. They were touring all over the world. I went to sold-out shows in Fukuoka. I mean, in southern Japan. They were really, really doing phenomenally well. But not anymore. But there's this fascination and overvaluation of all things New Japan, including the style. I get the hard style. I used to enjoy watching it occasionally from Japan. But there's such an over-reliance upon it in AEW. This shit doesn't fly here. It's not even flying in Japan. So they're importing a style and overemphasizing it, actually diluting the hell out of it, because it's just not that interesting to watch. But they're putting so much time and effort in that. And you see it throughout a lot of the different matches. If I see one more scene in a ring where guys are standing there, just forearming each other, standing there,
hate it.
Nothing is going to make me want to throw the television out a fucking window faster than that. Sloppy, zero talent. You're not that fucking tough. These are working forearms. We all fucking know it. It's not exciting to watch. You're not advancing the story. You're doing nothing for your fucking character. And you're telling everybody your shit's fake because you're eating fucking elbows and not selling it. So let's do some more of that.
I've said before, and it's funny because
big party, baby. Come on.
There was this announcer back in WCW, can't remember his name, who mentioned Shawn Michaels' super kick, right?
Yeah.
That it wouldn't get him some maybe a yellow belt or something at the YMCA.
Green belt.
Green belt. That's what it was. Yes.
I know that too.
Yeah. But I've argued the point from a pro wrestling standpoint that you look at, everyone loves, the super kick party with the Young Bucks. I said, Young Bucks have the worst super kick in professional wrestling, and Shawn Michaels has the best, because Shawn Michaels would kick you and he would pin you and you were done. The Young Bucks take their turns back and forth, kicking you several times. You still haven't fallen down yet. Then they wind up and both kick you at the same time, sometimes with thumbtacks or explosions on their feet. And you still kick out at 2. So they have the worst super kick in the history of professional wrestling, in my opinion.
I'll
tell you what, I fight both of those guys at the same time with a cup of coffee in my hand. That's how weak their shit is. I am 70 years old. Put them both in a room this size with me and take bets on who comes out. Stupid.
Yeah,
it's
I never
stupid.
understood it.
I know who my money's on.
It's like I describe it. Sometimes I try to describe my reaction to things like that in a way that someone that doesn't watch wrestling can understand. Mm-hmm. What you just described is a sequence of high spots that are visually cool. I mean, it's fun to watch, like a video game. I get it. But as a viewer, when I see that, it takes me out of the moment, because what I'm looking at now is more like gymnastics floor exercises. It doesn't excite me. I appreciate the athleticism, but that's not why the fuck I'm watching. Right. And I'd like you to go into a movie, whatever the hottest movie is right now, with real people in it, not animation. And you're sucked into a scene. It's like a really intense scene in a movie. And then from the top of the movie screen, you see the microphone boom kind of slide into the frame. And then you go, what the fuck is that? You should have done that. It takes you out of the moment.
Yeah.
I was invested in the scene. I want to see who was going to shoot who, or who was going to screw who, or who was going to catch who in the car. Whatever the scene is, I'm into it. You got me. You got me in the palm of your freaking hands. And then I see a boom, Mike.
It's like the Fast and Furious series. When that first started, I was like, this is really cool. It's a bunch of racing cars. Like, I can get into this, and there's like realistic fights. But by the time they got to like Fast and Furious like 7 or 8, like Vin Diesel was stomping on the ground and breaking concrete, and I was just like, what? It's like, at that point I was like, I'm done. I love The Rock, but Jesus Christ, I can't. There's no way I can continue.
There's a term for it, and jumping the shark is one that's often used when it comes to seeing, something that's made you go, oh fuck, you just ruined it. That's what we're talking about here. And with the guys, with so many people and the fans, the K's and Frankie's and the Dave Meltzers of the world, they're so into that shit. The technical aspect of it, or the athleticism of it, which again I relate to and I understand, but it can't be the dominant thing.
Right.
You've got to introduce some of that in a story so that it makes sense, and then people will stay sucked in. But it's never going to happen. Dave Meltzer is living his fantasy through Tony Khan. Tony Khan is doing everything that Dave Meltzer has been professing for years should be done to take wrestling to the next level. And he's been proven. We've all called out his bullshit forever. Those of us that have been in the business at a high level, we've always called out his shit, and the people, he's just bitter, he's just angry, whatever excuse they would. No, because we know this guy's fucking stupid, and his take on wrestling is absolutely 180 degrees from anything you should ever think about doing. But Tony's doing it.
Right.
And I'm having a blast watching the fallout. Watching Dave spin, like turning himself into a fucking human pretzel, trying to justify and defend and spin the shit that's coming out of AEW is actually hilarious. And I listen to him. Now, here's the challenge when I listen to Dave or read his shit. You know how the brain works. You have neurotransmitters that, recognizes things, and it gets processed in a supercomputer in your brain. And the supercomputer has these things called neural pathways, which access different parts of your brain. It all comes together and shit comes out of your mouth, right? Or you feel or see or react to things. But the problem I have with Dave is when I try to read his shit or listen to him, my neural pathways go on fucking strike. No. We're not going to try to make sense out of this shit. Fuck you, Eric. We're not doing it. They go on strike. They shut down. My fucking neural pathways say no.
It's like, oh man, it's like Billy Madison when he like answers that question, and the moderator's like, "We are all now dumber for listening to everything you just said."
It's absolutely hilarious, and I get a kick out of watching it so much because he's such a bitter, angry, dark person, and he finds his attention. He finds a little group of nerds like him, or people that think like him. Tony being one of them. And they have their own little, nerd community here that they all love the same thing, and they think that everybody else should like it too. And if you don't, well, as Dave used to say, when Cornette or I or Bruce Pritchard would criticize Tony, well, they're just out of touch. Really? We're out of touch? I know 900,000 people out there somewhere that might have a different opinion because we predicted where AEW is right now. I predicted 3 years ago. Everybody thought I was a hater. I was jealous. I was angry because Tony didn't offer me a job. All this bullshit stuff that, the AEW sickos that live on social media thought or wanted to believe. But we were telling Tony, if you do this, this is going to happen. I've been harping on storylines for 2.5 years. Now all of a sudden people are going, fucking Brian Alvarez, a little twit. He's on there with Dave Meltzer saying, I think we really need their storylines. No shit, Sherlock. Where the fuck have you been?
Oh, man.
Oh, I know where you've been. You've been calling guys like Jim Cornette and Bruce Pritchard and Eric Bischoff and Conan, we're fucking out of touch and irrelevant, bitter old guys. No, we predicted it, and now it's happening. Everything that I said would happen, honestly, I don't think I've been off once. Everything I predicted over the last 3 or 4 years is happening in real time.
And again, I think it's like Josh had mentioned before, we do have, I have people within the front office of AEW that I know, and the people, and obviously the talent speaks for itself. There's a lot of guys down there that I love and I want to see succeed, but it's like, you're being led by a blind man into the pond. You know what I mean? I don't really know. And I don't get me started on the Tony Khan voice that me and Josh have mentioned on this show when he goes out there and he starts speaking like this. And I don't know why. I don't know where that comes from. But I just like, if there's not a solve, it's one of those things where you just hope that Tony opens up. That's the only way. And you mentioned it before. It's the only way this thing gets on the right path is that he hires the team or he brings in the team, or at least he listens to somebody else's opinions. You got guys that are legends down there that might know a thing or two. Jeff Jarrett, like guys like that, like they're all down there and they're all seasoned vets, and they probably have said, hey, I'd probably do it this way. And Tony's like, that's a good idea. I'll consider it. And then doesn't. Right. And then it's just like, okay, we're back to square one. So it's like, at one point, I mean, you said it's 30% a year. Okay, then do the math. Yeah, 3.3 years. They're all looking for work, and that's a sad deal. So,
well, I mean, if I have friends, and I do have friends that work at several actually, and if they're listening to this or they hear this in one way, shape, or form, or love it, enjoy every minute of it, because you never know. Even with a guy who's a multi-billionaire and doesn't really seem to care, you just never know when it's going to end. Shad Khan and Tony Khan filed bankruptcy on a black news organization that they were all behind too, because it got to the point where it was just not manageable anymore. There was no upside. There was no plan to turn it around. So you make the business decision to file for bankruptcy and shut it down, which is exactly what Tony Khan's company, along with his father, did. It's public record. It's not a secret. It's a smart move when you get to that point. I think if I had a friend inside of AEW, I would maybe remind them of that even though things look like they're going to go forever, doesn't mean they do.
Right.
So that's number one. And while you're there, find a way to be grateful for it. Find a way to enjoy it, no matter how difficult or frustrating it is. And have a plan B. Know what you're going to save your money. And have a plan B. Anticipate the day. Not that you have to have a bunch of jobs lined up and ready to go, but have a really good idea of what you want to do next. So when that time comes, you don't go through that emotion, oh my God, what am I going to do? I didn't think it was going to happen. Oh, fuck, how am I going to pay my bills? Just plan for it. And you'll find it's a lot easier to have fun in your situation, because I know a lot of people there too, and I hear a lot of the frustration. So we all know it exists. Mm-hmm. But it's a lot easier to deal with that frustration when you're confident in your next move, should you need it. You only become emotionally frustrated with situations, and it starts keeping you up at night, and you start becoming less productive, less fun to be around, whether it's your family or your coworkers. That only happens when you know subconsciously you don't have a plan. You sense something's not right. You don't know what it is for sure or what's going to happen, but you do know I don't have a plan. Get a fucking plan.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's for sure is after this episode, I don't think Dave and I are getting a job at AEW. So
You know what, man?
I don't think you should. Honestly, and I don't mean to sound like I'm beating up on Tony. You should not want a job there. Why would anybody want to go there in the current condition it's in? Now you say, yeah, but what if you offer you $5 million? Fuck yeah, I'm going to take $5 million. As long as I'm not going to jail for it, I'm taking it.
Hey, you go and you try and contribute, right? You try, and if someone wants to pay you to be a yes man and not be able to contribute, then at some point, you know, depending on where you are in your career, and a lot of people have made this choice, they say, oh, you know, the old pin me, pay me. You know, they're just happy to get that money while they can, and you know, hey, more power to them.
That's when I said that, you know, take the $5 million.
Yep.
Not for me at this point in my life, but if I'm currently in AEW, fuck yeah, take the bag. Learn to have fun with it. Let go of your frustrations because you don't have any control over anything. It'd be different if you had some influence or control, but you don't. So fuck it. Do the best you could do. Try new stuff. Try to improve your own, you know, abilities and talents. But just don't even let the frustration, just let it run off your back. Because things are either going to turn around, Tony's either going to see the light, or somebody will force him to. Probably the former, not the latter. He's either going to see the light, or you're going to be looking for work. There's nothing in what he's doing won't work long term. That I know. It just can't. You can't go to zero. And at the current trajectory, they're on their fucking way to zero in a matter of 36 or 39 months at this point. So fucking have fun while you're doing it. Take the money and have a plan B. You'll have more fun. Your wife will like you better. Your husband, your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. It's dogs. Everybody's happy.
Mm. To kind of wrap things up on a positive note, I will say something that was really cool for me. And I'm curious if you, how old is your grandson at this point, Eric?
3 years and 2 months.
Okay. So he's still a little young to be watching wrestling, I guess, right? Like he's not going to get into it yet.
He's taking, he's in martial arts.
Okay. So he's doing that.
He's in gymnastics. So I don't know, maybe. Here's the thing now. At this age, you start showing them too much of that stuff, and the first thing they do when they go to preschool is like, wow,
right.
somebody.
You got to. I've had that conversation with my kids. Yeah. You know, one thing that this is the last thing I wanted to bring up was just because I took 2 out of 3 of my kids, my 9-year-old, my 7-year-old, to Raw in Philly. It was the first ever live wrestling show they've been to. They've watched some pay-per-views. They've watched clips of the shows. I've made sure to kind of, you know, make sure what I'm showing them is something I've seen first to know what's going on. I have never, in all the things I've been lucky enough to be able to do, working backstage at different companies, going as a fan to all these things, being involved in all the, you know, the great stuff, StarCast and all of those. The most fun I've ever had in my entire life going to a wrestling thing was watching it through my kids' eyes, watching their reactions to things. You know, Cody, their hatred towards the bloodline at this point, you know, my kids learned to yeet. They showed up looking around going, I'm not really sure what this yeet thing is that everyone's doing. By the end of the night, Jey Uso's coming to the ring and my kids they're bouncing there. And it was hysterical. My question with that is, do you think right now we have AEWs for the sickos, right? WWE, everyone sits there and goes, oh my God, I can't wait till they go to Netflix so they can be TV 14, so they don't have all this stuff. To me, I'm not saying I want to go back to, you know, garbage men and stuff like that. But to me, I wish there was at least one show, one brand at least from a company that was really geared towards kids in a way that they could enjoy it in the way that I remember in the, you know, 80s and early 90s. You know, for me, I'm 41, so I grew up, the you know, NWO storyline kicked off as my teenage years kicked off. The Attitude Era was as I grew with it, right? Like it was perfect for me. Right when I would have said, it's getting a little too cheesy for me, that's when the realism started to come in the stories and I started really getting into it. Do Do you think there's a place for that? Do you think there's a way, or do you think WWE is doing a good job right now balancing that? Because, man, kids, I mean, obviously love that product. Where do you think, as we head into the Netflix era, where do you think...
WWE, first of all, that's a really good observation on your part, and it's an interesting question because there's no simple answer, and I'm going to give it to you anyway. I don't care if we're running out of time. So easy for me to say because I was 15 minutes late.
Hey, no, we're good.
But in theory, right, we have that scenario right now. You've got SmackDown on USA, which is not going to become TV 14.
Sure.
So you theoretically have your younger skewing show, and then theoretically, perhaps, we don't know what the show's going to look like on Netflix, if they're going to push that envelope or not. I hope they don't. But let's say they do, and they're going to push that envelope. They're going to give us more of the Attitude-esque type of vibe to it that you wouldn't necessarily want your 6 or 8 year old kid to watch.
Right.
So you've got an option now. You have to make the decision as a parent whether you want your kid in the room while you're watching Netflix or not. But, whatever. You probably deal with that anyway if you're watching movies or whatever.
Sure.
But so you theoretically have that choice. Here's why I don't think it's going to. I think WWE, let's just take SmackDown. I don't think WWE could take, we're going to have our TV 14 MA Netflix wrestling over here on Netflix. We're going to have our family-friendly version over here on SmackDown. So we're going to take SmackDown and we're going to skew it even a little younger because now I want to go for teens and preteens. That would be almost impossible, in my opinion. 18 to 49 is where the money is. 18 to 49 is where the advertising dollars go. Teens and preteens are great. In fact, the CPMs, the cost per thousand, the actual cost of those ads that specifically target teens and preteens used to be, I don't know if they are anymore, but when I was active in the business just up until several years ago, teens and preteens has a higher value, but there's just not enough volume. There's not enough advertisers that are targeting that specific demo. The ones that do will pay a high dollar for it, but there's not enough of the ones that do. So the bulk of your revenue, ad revenue, therefore television business, is coming from 18 to 49. You can't abandon them in your attempt to get teens and preteens. Now you can squeeze it. You can squeeze in a little bit of the teen preteen thing, and I think that WWE is doing actually a pretty good job of doing that. So I think possibly you'll see a more mature version on Netflix and your more family-friendly version on SmackDown. I don't suspect they're going to change Netflix all that much.
But I think also family-friendly is the key. Family-friendly versus kids. Because I think
your 8-year-old is going to drive himself with his buddies to the arena.
It's family-friendly.
So the parents got to dig it too. Yep. You don't want it to be like fucking Disney on Ice.
And that's what they have. Like I said before with, Jey Uso with the yeet and all that stuff, the bright colors. I mean, the kids are all into it. They're excited. They love Cody, his whoa and the pyro and all that. And they love the storyline at a high level. But then they've also got that more intricate level to that bloodline storyline, for instance, that I think the older fans are really getting into. And I think that I think adult programming has to be, it goes back to everything you were saying about story, has to be smart, has to be a smart story. It doesn't have to be crude, doesn't have to be, TV 14 language.
No, I mean, if it gets gratuitous, it's fun to watch for a while. I mean, I'm just, an average funny motherfucker like everybody else. I don't mind watching some gratuitous stuff on television every once in a while. It kind of reminds me of the old days. I'm cool with it. But once in a while, don't make it, a main course, because I get bored with that shit too real fast.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, listen, Eric, thank you so much for taking this time. I know we kicked things off. We said, hey, maybe we'll do 20 minutes, cap it an hour for sure. Here we are, an extended, the wrestling hour plus. cannot thank you enough for taking the time to talk with us here.
Hey, it's been fun for me. So anytime you guys want to do it again, just you know how to find me.
All right. Well, listen, that was a fantastic interview, a fantastic sit down with Mr. Eric Bischoff. He is just the knowledge just goes so far deep, and I'm so glad that he's as transparent as he is, Josh. You know, like a lot of these guys, they fluff and they just kind of say the right things, and they don't want to really like, ooh, I don't want to step on any eggshells or anything like that.
He has earned the place in this business and in his life to not give a fuck. And I love it. I love it. That, if nothing else, that is what I truly aspire to in this life, in this world, is to get to that point. And I think I'm like kind of there already.
Ooh,
but deep down, hey, in the back of our minds, though, we're still like, we've got a legacy that we want to create, right?
Sure.
We haven't created a legacy in this business yet. I know people are going, Josh, what are you talking about? You're huge. You have 7 action figures. You're kind of a big deal. And yeah, you make a great point. But no, but that's the thing, man. He doesn't, when you know you're right, you can argue all day long. And that's really where Eric is. Agree with him or disagree with him. He is confident that he's right. And hey, maybe we drank the Kool-Aid, but I happen to agree with him.
No, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the numbers. Like, these things don't lie. Stats don't lie. You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. Again, you could agree or disagree with his takes, but 9 times, maybe 10 times out of 10, Bischoff is kind of on point with a lot of his stuff. So we do thank him for joining us this week, and we thank you for hanging with us this entire episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. Do us a favor. Listen, if you're listening to this on ad-free shows, well, of course, we thank you. If you're listening to this on iTunes, Spotify, anything like that, please rate and review the show. It helps us grow. It helps people search for us. It gets us out there. And one day we're going to be up there with the Busted Opens of the world. And one day we're going to be up there with the Chris Van Vliets of the world. Like,
love him.
Yeah, exactly. Like, who doesn't love CVV? Who doesn't love Busted Open, right? Like, these are all people. It's one wrestling community. And I think that this interview was very, very well done. So please like the video and subscribe to the podcast. Do everything you're supposed to do. And of course, at the end of the day, when you're done with all this, you're going to log on to myfandomapp.com. You're going to create your profile if you haven't already. If you've been listening to the sounds of our voices for over a year now, this is the way you got to do it. Log on, create your profile, log all of the events. Josh, you just put up some fantastic pictures of your night in Philly. You talked about that on the interview with Mr. Bischoff. Great night in Philadelphia, wrestling. That's like, look, you see the star on my head. Like, I'm a Dallas Cowboy through and through.
Oh, are you?
But when it comes to professional wrestling, there might not be a rival city between, like, there's 1 and 1A, and I think it's New York, and I think it's Philly. And I don't think it's close, right?
We'll throw Chicago in there just a bit.
Chicago gets a healthy dose because of, Punk and everything else that's been going on out there. But I think it's Philly, and I think it's New York, and I think it's a great time. So log those great times on the MyFandom app on iOS, and obviously coming to Android, if not there already. So thank you guys for watching. This has been another episode of The Wrestling Hour. I'm Dave Sturchio. That's Josh Shernoff, and we'll see you guys next time.